So, hello, namaste, namaskar, welcome, good afternoon, good morning, or maybe even good evening, in whichever part of the world you are joining us from. My name is Deepak R. Khemani, and I am one of the co founders of Bloom. Along with Abhijit Sansgiri, another of my co founders and my co host for today. And we will be expecting Payal, who will joining us in a little while. It gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you to this 208th non-stop Sunday Bloom Talk Show. Exactly 208 weeks ago, we went live the first time, started with an idea that let's connect with people, let's bring in trainers, coaches, healers, doctors, athletes, speakers, influencers, anybody whose life journey, whose experience, whose guidance can help change people's lives. In that journey of 207 episodes, which has already been done, we've had people from every continent across the world come and grace our platform. Thank you to everybody for doing that and continuing in that series. Today, we have a very special person. We have with us Praggati Rao. Pragati is a certified psychologist. She is a personal growth and professional relevance transformation coach and an internationally certified NLP master coach and EI expert. Now, there is an introduction of hers which I can read out and it will take a few minutes. Instead of that, let me ask Pragati to introduce herself. Tell us a little bit about who you are, what do you do, why do you do, and then we will take the show ahead. Over to you, Pragati.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for having me here. It's an absolute pleasure to talk on something which is so close to my heart. Empathy is something that I've been pursuing for long now. So I feel that, in a certain way, I've been able to decode it. And whatever I share here today would be my perspective on that. Of course, something that coming from my mentors and things like that. Coming back to the next question that you asked me, that's quite a lot of things. So, what do I do? I am a consultant psychologist. I'm an internationally certified EI coach, and I have a 17 years long active experience in all these domains, including personal growth and transformation coaching. Uh, then why do I do it? Okay, so if you look at my background, if people who have looked at my LinkedIn profile, they would see I'm a science person who's graduated on to a second master's in psychology and moved on to do almost every single bit, every single domain that, expertise which is available for personal growth and leadership development. ACC was the only pending thing. Even I'm pursuing that also at the moment. So it looks like I finished the whole circle of learning, though it's just the beginning. I don't say that I'm an expert in any domain at all. But yes, I think the journey is going very beautifully well, and I'm happy to be on it. Coming back to, so one was, what do I do? Why do I do it? So why do I do it? I think it also has a personal angle to it. I have been through certain, highs and lows in life, which has made me understand that this is the thing which would take you rather than any person, anybody else. You are your own, so we are a force to reckon with. And only once we identify that and we work on ourselves, we will be able to look at life in a broader perspective. So that's why I do it. It gives me immense pleasure to not just earn out of my work, but also when I get a lot of God bless yous from people. So God bless you is the added advantage because of which I work in this domain. And then what was your last bit? If you can tell me, there's lots to answer.
So what we'll do is we'll just take that little bit, keep it for a little while later, and as the show progresses, we'll touch upon those things. Let me
Awesome.
ask Abhijit, to come in and start the Q&A. Officially over to you, Abhijit.
Fine. Thank you. Thank you, Pragati, for accepting our invitation and speaking on the subject which is very close to your heart. So let's start with the basic. What is empathy and EI in the truest sense of the word?
Okay, so first of all, thank you, Abhijit, for having me here. It's the pleasure and the feeling is mutual. So thanks
Yeah,
a lot. And I'm happy
thank
and
you.
congratulating both of you to come this way long. 2,208 Sundays is a lot of time to devote.
Yes.
Coming back to your question, what is empathy? So, in the most commonest of form, what do we know about empathy? Everybody knows that empathy is about stepping into other people's shoes and looking at a scenario from that perspective, right? So, this is the
Yeah.
most common understanding of it. So, allow me to answer it in two ways. One could be a metaphorical explanation given by Simon Baron, who is one of the clinical psychologists at the University of Cambridge. He's given something very beautiful, and I think that would touch with most of the audience here. He says empathy is a universal solvent. All problems which are immersed into it get completely dissolved. So if that is the beauty of empathy, I think it is very important to actually sit down and take a note and work towards becoming a more empathetic person. If we talk of technically what Daniel Goleman says, and luckily I'm very happy that I've learned under him. So he says empathy is one of the biggest pillar of the whole science of emotional intelligence. There are five of them. We already know the four are, self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship management, and finally, empathy sits at the core of all of this. If we go a little further, if I have to just describe it for all of us here, it would be our ability to recognize emotions and feelings in other people, understand them, and do something about it. It's not just lip sympathy. Empathy is so much about recognizing first, being warm enough, which means witnessing, acknowledging, reflecting, and finally making an action plan around it. So that's what empathy, according to me, is.
Fine. So I think it's a skill, right? Which one can acquire over time. So how does one acquire empathy, or is it by birth we generally empathetic people?
Okay, so if we look at empathy, it is definitely not a technical skill, but it is a very much in demand soft skill. It's an interpersonal skill. And most importantly, the beauty of empathy is the day you become conscious around it, you can actually go ahead and develop it. Now, your question was, can we develop it at any point? Of course, yes. The only thing that you need is a very conscious, intentional focus on, okay, this is where I want to go. And in the current times, if you look at it, empathy is it's become even more important because if you've got to be a good manager, if you've got to be a good parent, if you've got to be a good friend, and you miss out on this bit, I don't think you can actually achieve that. Another important element is how do we go about it? So, whatever goes into empathy, number one is active listening, a very intentional process of being present for the other person. You may not have gone through a similar challenge or a scenario, but if you are actively present and you are curious about what happened, what are the feelings and emotions they are going through, you acknowledge them, you validate that. So, acknowledgement and validation, and the whole idea of you being having those kind of qualities is equally important. So active listening, active questioning, getting curious, then maybe looking at sometimes when when we hear something we get a little judgmental. So if we do not judge other people, that also we can also work towards being more empathetic. So that's another way to develop it. Two broad categories which actually help in developing empathy in anybody for that matter are number one, having role plays, having indirect understanding of the life scenarios, and learning it through coachings, mentors, and so on and so forth. And the second one is experiential, experiences. We've got to create more and more of them. Something which doesn't which doesn't act like my own automatic response. So if I go beyond my automatic patterns and responses, I can actually get into empathy.
Thanks. You're going quite deep into it. So just one question which came out of this is, when you
Hmm.
are into active listening is fine, but when you're into active questioning and getting curious, shouldn't you have the right balance? Because at certain points of time, people may misunderstand that you are intruding somebody's privacy. So how do you balance that when you're showing
Very
empathy?
beautiful question. Very, very beautiful question, because now comes the role of other elements like you should have clear boundaries of how much to go deep, how much to stop, and your voice intonation matters a lot. Are you reading the verbal or the non-verbal cues right? Because sometimes it's the cues which will tell us where to stop. Curiosity is a good thing, but curiosity when, asking too much and at a time when you can clearly see the other person is not keen on answering that is also detrimental. So empathy, as I said, it's a very refined skill. And that is where when you can see the primary evidence, how the person is behaving, acting, giving certain body cues, some non-verbal gestures, you can actually see that whether I continue to ask my questions, am I making the other person feel good, or do I stop here? So I think boundaries become very important here. And your own, I would say, your own awareness of the system. What I have learned with my master here is that there are two elements here for empathy. One is the empathy as a skill in itself, and the second is the organizational awareness, which means the environment in which you are operating. Are you aware of that? If you're aware of that, you would definitely stop at, you would know where to stop and how far to go deep into it. So that's what is my undertaking of this whole thing.
Thanks, thanks. So, how does psychology play a factor in it, and how would you uh, the role of you speak of some biopsychological system. So what exactly do you mean by that?
Okay, so even so that's a complete system of mirror neurons. I'll also go there. Before that,
Yeah.
I have to tell you, psychology came in a little later for empathy. Empathy has been there for a decade now. When we started, say, in mid 19th century, that was a time psychology was actually being referred by the people who were aestheticians. That is, who would appreciate art, and they would look at art and experience the whole experience, the inner experience. They were able to relate to a French word which means having a look, right? So looking was the first initiation by aestheticians. Then came the psychologist, which was only afterwards the end of the 19th century. And you know what they said? It's not about looking, it's about feeling. They got the word feel, and that's where psychology actually becomes very important. Of course, after that, it went into a philosophical domain as well. But now that your question asks me, what are the psychological bits of it? So even for empathy to deepen, there are three levels to it. When we look at the other person and we, try to understand on a level of cognition, on a level of knowledge, that's one empathy, which is called cognitive empathy, right? So you look at somebody and you understand what is happening. Maybe you would dig down deeper into what was your understanding of a similar scenario, and that's where that empathy comes. That's a level one. When you not just understand, but you also experience and feel that, that is where you go to the next level of emotional empathy, right? And emotional empathy is the one where all the trust, all the bonding, openness, and everything, germinates to such an extent that people can actually be engaged and involved. So a good manager is actually on the level of cognitive as well as emotional empathy, both. Now comes a little deeper. So when you go a little deeper, it's all about compassionate empathy, which means you are concerned, you are curious, you are interested in the other person, and you are interested more about connection than about correction. Maybe you don't want to tell them, oh, this is how you should react or take an action towards. You will hold that for some time and you will look at connecting with that person. That's where the psychological system of mirror neurons. So you're so concerned, so emotionally attuned to the other person that you could begin to feel the actual emotion that person is going through. And that's called activation of mirror neurons. So when mirror neuron system gets activated, it's almost like a level of synchronous, understanding and connection with the other people. So that's where psychology becomes very important when it comes to empathy. I hope that answers your question.
Fine. So great. I think I never knew there were three levels of empathy, and I really liked it. Connecting rather than connecting. I think I'll just note that forever. But you talked of mirror neurons. Can you just simplify that? It's a bit complex for people like me.
Yeah. Okay, so we all have people, when we sit with them, we feel validated, heard, acknowledged, and we want to connect with them because that's more meaningful. It's more humane. It's between I and you. It's not about I and it. So when it is about I and you, there's a definite connection, there's a meaning, there is a deeper than usual, so this only happens because your mirror neuron, which is certain parts of the brain, are ignited in the same way as other persons. So that connection is so strong. So every time you have a great friend or an amazing mentor or a coach or a manager or anybody who touches you much more deeper than usual, you know it is the mirror neurons and the synchronicity at work.
Yeah, fine. Thanks. Uh, just one more thing which we hear every time is that leaders need to have empathy. So, how does empathy feel feed into this leadership system?
Okay. So leadership, what I think is on three levels. How are you thinking? How are you talking? And is it helping you? If this is what leadership for any, person in the life and in professional domain means, look at empathy in the same way. When we have cognitive empathy, we are trying to understand. So before I go there, I need to highlight a cognitive triad between how we think. Based on that, we feel certain things. And based on our feelings, we take an action. Either we take it or we avoid it, right? So this triad itself means thoughts are connected with feelings and feelings are connected with your actions. And if you take the triad and expand it to just now what I talked about, three types of empathy, it will look at a leader has to know a cognitive empathy, which means he should know what motivates my team, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, what could put them on a, detail them, what could actually be their mood. They become so good at reading the mood of the room, the mood of the people, the motivation, how it works for them. Or even if they're pitching for certain product services or even projects, they would know what is the language to be used. So a leader has to have that if they want to have a very effective, productive, and integrated system of not just managing people, but also kind of putting across their their products, services, etc., in a way that it's easily lapped up. There's certainly not manipulation, but of course, it is all about organizational awareness, how you see the environment that you're part of. The role of leader is what? It's about motivating their people and making sure that they stay on that road to motivation for long enough, right? And when a leader is empathetic on a level of cognition, that is where they know intuitively, okay, this person, this is what works, or that person, this is how I have to give it. Taking this a little deeper, if you look at the effective or the emotional empathy, if the leader is not aware of that, they will not validate what the person is going through. Of course, all office work, all teams are nothing but, coming together of humans, right? And human
Yeah.
beings, they are because of their feelings. And if you don't acknowledge them, if you don't accept them, if you don't reflect them, you will never be able to be a great leader. So that's where, empathy and leadership connects. And finally, going a step deeper, people would always come and tell you that a certain mentor or a boss, they still remember. They still want to go back, connect, and learn with them. What is that? That's simply their ability to not just help them on a level of emotional, psychological well-being, but also on a level of creating meaning of the same work. Jahan subah se sham jana hi hai. So if they've got to be go there, why not a leader who could actually help them make that place purposeful and meaningful? That's where leadership and empathy actually is connected in beautifully seamless ways.
So, ideally, it's essential for a leader to have what is called as compassionate empathy, right? So, when you're talking of great leaders, I think cognitive and emotional is now maybe forgiven. It's a must for leaders to have that. It's ideal, and now I believe a must have for leaders to have compassionate empathy. Is what I
And
understand.
on that note, Abhijit, I need to highlight something here. I was coaching a leader and he comes across and says, I am not empathetic. I said, why would you feel like that? Because he said, I have only cognitive. So I gave him later that, okay, empathy is on three levels. You cannot
Yeah.
be saying I do not have empathy just like that. Maybe your point of reference is somebody who's a little more, expressive, a little more about connecting with people. But then we all are different. We all have different ways of connecting with people and showing our emotions. And empathy does take a lot of vulnerability as also. It's not like, you want it so people will switch on and switch off. So I told, him that it's not only about having the deepest one, which is the compassionate empathy. Sometimes people operate from maybe, the first one here, cognitive empathy. Sometimes people would go just a notch deeper and happy being emotional, empathizers. But that's how it works. None of us can say it does not have because we come wired with that. So maybe the level needs to be deepened, but each one of us operates on one or the other level based on our perceptions, based on our personality types, based on the leadership style that we want to embrace.
Fine. So how does one know what is one's level of empathy and what should be the ideal level of empathy for each person? So how does one measure it?
Very beautiful question. I so like this question. Okay, so how do we do that? Now that I see so many people already in the session, at least all of us can be mindful of that right here, right now. So there are certain things which I'm going to say, and I want everybody to take a mental note of how do I fit into this one thing on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 being the least and 10 being the max. So number 1 here is biased. How biased I am is one domain that you need to understand. So many times we are so biased, we have so strong, inflexible beliefs about people, situations, work, and things that we wouldn't want to shift. And that could be actually a barrier to being more empathetic. Second could be your perceptual positions. Not many people know that perceptual positions have 3 areas to look into. Am I looking at the scenario from my own eyes, from others' eyes, as well as from the eye of an observer? So, where we look at our role, others' role, and also the system's role. So, when we do that, how are we scoring on those levels? Do we even go to other domains of perception on a regular day? If we don't, of course, we are going to score low here. The third thing here is active listening. So this is something which is really suffering, post pandemic. Most of us are so glued to our devices and our own preoccupations that presence or, intentional focus on the other person has gone drastically down. Where are we with respect to that intentional focus and percent of our presence? Again, on a scale of 1 to 10. The next could be, do we even hone our skill of active questioning? So active questioning doesn't mean you kind of, fire one question after the other. It means you are alert to how your questions are being received. Are we even paying attention to that? There are people who could actually offend you with the kind of questions and the number of questions they ask you. And so I think that's very important. And finally, what is also equally important is, so again, as I said, empathy is also about being least judgmental. How judgmental you are. How, and the last one here, how pro action. It's not about the lip service or being reactive or being there. How proactive you are in offering your support as an action, not just as a sympathy, where you are listening to what the other person has said, you give it a very silver tone and give it, oh no, you should look at it like this. No, it doesn't work like that. The other person's mental model will not look at what silver streak you're adding to it. So I think that's where active listening, active question, curiosity, everything becomes so important. So if we could just work on even 2, 3 of these domains, we'll be in a very safe space.
So finally, it's I understand it's the compassionate and the genuine care for the other person. It's not giving lip service. It's basically being there to support and actually support. Fine. Thanks. Now, empathy is just one part of emotional intelligence, which is quite wide. So again, how does one measure one's emotional intelligence? And let's say, as a chartered accountant, where we just talk of numbers, and as an auditor, we benchmark to best practices and where you are and where you want to be. So ideally, where should one be, and how does know where he is? And lastly, before Deepak takes over, what have you learned from, you said, from the master himself? I think you've learned this from Dan Goldberg, right? So what are his special learnings which you've imbibed, and which
The
you would
first
like
most
to share with us?
important thing.
Huh?
Yeah, please complete. Please complete.
Yeah. So what is it that you would like to share?
Okay. So first most important thing here is empathy is not a number. I wish empathy was a number and we all could look at that number and feel safe. Oh, I have arrived. So even despite being on this journey for so many years, I don't think I'm going to arrive. because this is such an interpersonal and social skill that arriving is just not on the agenda. And how do you know that? That if you're doing fair enough, good enough in this domain is through the feedbacks, is through the meaning and the connection that you create with people around you. And you will hear that, people will always come and tell you the influence that you have on me is immense. Or they would often want to come back to you, learn from you, be with you. And these are the simple, green flags of how you are doing on the scale of empathy. You're more understanding, you are more supportive, you hold the space for others to be who they are. And that is where, and again, because we are humans, because we are moody beings, our mood could also decide the number of, how we go. Really well on a certain day. And when we are stressed and not doing well, we will come down and we'll say, to the hell with everybody. I am only focusing on myself today. So that's where empathy cannot have a number. For all those people who are focusing on numbers as, important, I understand for a CA this matters, but for others, they'll have to do with holding on to the number and doing.
Yeah, fine. So it's not a number. I'm saying, let's say we also have when we talk of risks or something. So I would put it not having empathy is a risk, and we always look at how you are benchmarked on the risk maturity curve. So something like somebody being absolutely naive about empathy, not knowing what it is, somebody being just aware of this is what empathy is. So I believe whoever is in the show is much more beyond aware to somebody being enabled to basically being in the journey and being there. So as you said, he'll be up and down. He would be either a cognitive, empathetic person or at the second level or a compassionate ape. So maybe somebody who's, I would say, a refined person would be at the third deeper level of empathy. So how does one stay there?
Okay. So now let's talk of the hierarchy. Now there, as you said, whatever I learned from the master, well, I have learned. We all know the four domains of EI, right? Self-management. First is self-awareness, self-management. Then you have is the social awareness and the relationship management. Now, when it comes to the first tier, which is the self-awareness, the most important element here is the focus. Focus means what? Focus means, do I look within myself in case of challenges? Do I look outside and look into others? Do I look at the whole system? So these are the three focus questions that we need to often ask yourself while on a journey of the first level of EI, which is the self-awareness.
Yeah.
Once you've done enough or fairly good here, you move on to the next level of hierarchy, which is the self-management. So now that I'm aware of my emotions, my next best step would be, how can I best control it? And that is where self-management comes into play. How can I control it? Okay, so what is my achievement level? What is the level of understanding of my emotions? Can I look into the same emotion of others and feel great around it? So these are the certain things which is the level 2. And on level 3, which is social awareness, is where empathy sits, along with the environmental awareness. So people who are worked on themselves, who next have taken control of their emotions and their feelings, and then they move on to the next level, know that their empathy is going to be higher than others. And they will hear that. They will have lesser problems. They will be more, appreciated. People would feel comforted in their presence. And these are the things we all can be attuned to hear if we've done the first 2 levels right. So that's where, and then of course, if you're doing your empathy well, getting into relationship management becomes a cakewalk. So that's the hierarchy of how empathy can actually be deepened.
Thanks. I think I seriously understood it very, very simply. I think the way you put it was excellent. I think saying self-awareness, self-management, and the socially empathy residing at the third level of EI. And then if you have the third deeper level of empathy, which is the compassionate empathy, and that's where you can build relationships, and then that's where your mirror neurons can synchronize. I think excellent. So great. I think that was as simple as somebody could really put it. And just an off-side question, because you've written a book on parenting and you want to uh, you are refining that book, which would be out shortly. So how has empathy helped being a parent, and how would parents benefit by being maybe at third level of empathy.
Okay, so just a little correction here. My second book is also out.
Oh,
I finalized that, and that's out by in the pandemic itself. I started off writing on parenting, thinking parenting is about raising kids. Then I realized no, parenting is about raising the parent. And that's why my second book is now called Raising the Parent. So if we now go back and talk about parenting, it's all about if you are not happy with your child, know that are the your children are merely a reflection, right? So if we are not doing fine on empathy, connection, meaning, purpose, can we even imagine that mirror to reflect the right image? So for me, parenting is a very conscious process. It is not a power struggle. It is a very simple place of sharing your power with somebody who comes with immense amount of trust that you will do good. But what a parent is doing is being judgmental, being very, immediately coming upon very hardly on the children. In fact, dreaming for them. Why would you dream for them? Let them dream and you just be the air beneath their wings. So that's what my whole idea of parenting is. I have been operating on this conscious, aware understanding of parenting. This is one domain I started off with. Though today I am coaching, different clients, I have corporate clients, I have so much to do, entrepreneurs, but I'm never going to leave this domain because I feel because of this one tool of being utilizing empathy, getting myself step into my children's shoes and hundreds of other young adults that I often coach, I can as a matter of fact, I can step into their shoes and understanding what's pinching. And then because I understand that, I can moderate my language to help them feel supported. And when they feel supported, they open up. And when they open up, is where every solution lies. So, as I said, empathy is one of the most important universal solvent. All challenges will get completely dissolved. But a parent has to learn this better than anybody else. Because only when we are a good, see, all of us are doing really well in our work. But do we bring any of those techniques, even a few percentage of those techniques back home? No, we don't. We're just being ourselves. So I think parenting and empathy could be one of the best things to happen to this planet.
agree. I fully agree. Thank you for
My
so
pleasure.
lucidly explaining this subject. I think I would have read a lot of books and known about it from various people. I think something which I have taken away from this 30 minutes is exponentially exponential. So thank you. And Deepak, could you please take over? So
Thank
Deepak
you.
will be just going with the flow.
Okay.
Thank you, Abhijit, for asking all those questions. And in that question and answer, so many really difficult words, long English words, where I mean, you need to then first understand the words and all those words coming together, and then finally take out what is being said. How does how is that explained to a person who is probably not understanding English or who's probably a vernacular? So how would you then
Okay.
understand, make him understand the four types of or the three types of empathy and the four types of whatever you were saying? Tell us that how does that happen?
I love that question, and let me allow me to answer it in the best. I utilize both the languages. So imagine किसी को empathy के बारे में नहीं पता है.
Hmm.
Human beings है तो connection के बारे में तो पता होगा.
Really?
और अगर कनेक्शन के बारे में पता है तो आप कभी क्यूरियस होके ये देखिए कि कुछ लोगों के साथ आपका कनेक्शन इतना डीप कैसे है
Hmm.
और कुछ लोगों के साथ आप एक बेसिक कर्टसी लेवल के बियॉन्ड जा ही नहीं पाते.
Hmm.
I think that curiosity, once you get curious, you begin to find the answer for that, right? And what is the answer? The answer is, okay, I feel like this with this person.
Hmm.
If this is the kind of answer you get, great. How can I replicate this in other relationships? Okay, how do I do that? So the idea here is nothing else but a focus. Pele, go within and find out what do you like about that person? What is that coaching, mentoring, and any other association, parenting, or great friendships? How is that bringing meaning to your life? जब वो समझ आ जाए तो लेके उसको चलिए बाहर दूसरे relationships पे replicate करने की कोशिश कीजिए. I am sure all of us are super intelligent and because we come wired with this skill, इसको इतना समझने की जरूरत नहीं है जितना करने की जरूरत है. सामने कोई है, उसको कोई चैलेंज है, तो एक हो सकता है हाँ हाँ यार चैलेंज तो सभी को है, आजकल तो लाइफ स्ट्रेसफुल है. दिस इज वन वे ऑफ रेस्पॉन्डिंग एंड देन यू गेट ऑन विद योर वर्क एंड यू डू समथिंग. द अदर वे इज maybe something like acknowledging, I see that you're very upset. Just the language, right? So, देखा कोई परेशान है तो हम क्या बोलते हैं यार काफी परेशान दिख रहे हो. I see that you are not feeling too good today. All well. That person says हाँ all well because they don't want to be vulnerable. तो आप के चले जाते हैं. कुछ लोग ऐसे होते हैं नहीं नहीं there is something, please tell me, I'll be very happy to hear you out. वो empathetic होते हैं. And then they will ask, do you think there is something I can help you with? अब आप मुझे बताइए हम में से कौन ऐसे हैं जो ये नहीं करते हैं. हाँ कभी नहीं करते होंगे when shortage of time है, stressed है, परेशान है, too much of work. I know certain scenarios empathy takes a dip, but most of us would love to do that for most people. And when that person opens up, we don't tell them कि अरे ऐसे क्यों सोचते हो, वैसे सोचो. क्यों भाई, उसकी सोच में तो उसका मेंटल मॉडल तो वही है, उसके तो बिलीव वही है. So जो चेंज करने की कोशिश करता है, people don't like them much initially. So initially, all you have to say is, I hear you. I understand what you're feeling. All that emotion is very valid. Please carry on. Let me know. I will be happy to hear. और जब आप साथ सुन लेते हैं उसके बाद कोई तो आप एक्शन करेंगे. Why don't you try this? I think I had a friend, ex-friend who's tried this and this worked. Do you think this would help you as well? This is what is empathy. I think this is simple enough.
It is as simple as it can be, and I mean, there are two or three things which came up in my mind when this question and answer between Abhijit and you was happening, and you spoke about leadership, you spoke about empathy. Yes, Brenda, I'll bring you in after this question, right after this question. Many a times, whenever there is you do not get along with somebody. It could be a company head or a leader with its junior, somebody in real life, in your family, or probably in friends. It is said that whenever there is an argument, or a discussion or a story, there are always three sides to that. It is yours, theirs, and the truth. How do you resolve situations like this where I'm stuck on my own, that guy is stuck on his own, and the truth is actually somewhere else?
Okay, so how do we do that? I had just talked about it in the session itself. I said, agar aapka perceptual positions ka score kam hai, which means you are always into your shoes, right?
Yes.
According to me, if I always say according to me, this is a reality. Of course, according to my system, my beliefs, my thoughts, my biases, my judgments, a reality is in a certain way. Now, I said, okay, I have perceived it in this way. Let me put it aside. Let me step into my boss's shoes or the manager or whosoever that I'm, not happy with.
Yeah.
And then I try to see what this person might be seeing, which I'm missing out.
Yeah.
Maybe I will add another domain or dimension to it. And then once I've done all of it, I make my clients look into perception by going to the observing position and look below. So they can actually be the fly on the wall. When you are fly on the wall, आपको खुद भी दिख रहा होता है कि हमारे क्या gestures हैं, क्या what do you say, non-verbal cues हैं, usage of language है. Sometimes it is just a smirk on your face which could trigger the other person.
Yes.
But when you are the observer, then you realized, oh, this is what I said, this is what I did, and maybe that kind of led to this. So observer is another beautiful position that we have to be to understand. Is it only the other person to contribute or we have also contributed? Yes. So I think taking my clients in different perceptual positions has always helped me. Taking them into growth mindset has always helped me. And sometimes people know they're just wanting to vent it out. Yeah. And then once they've vented it out, their rational brain is again back to place and then they think of all the possible options. Yes. So people are very resourceful, as I believe. It's just they take somebody to come in and let them see the big picture. Whenever हम जब भी किसी से नाराज होते हैं, upset होते हैं, we actually put a blinder here. वो जो शादी का घोड़ा होता है इस तरह से पहनता है. Correct. This is what we become. So we see very narrow. Yeah. So our role is just to take the blinders off and let them see the whole thing.
Yeah. Imagine the शादी का घोड़ा ब्लाइंडर अगर आप निकाल दो तो वो दूल्हे को लेके कहीं भाग जाएगा और दुल्हन बेचारी सोचती रहेगी ये घोड़ा कहाँ मेरे दूल्हे को लेके.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, I mean, very, very well answered, and in very simple way. Let me bring in Brenda because she's raised her hand, and there is a question from MK Sansgiri also, sir, that I will take after. Brenda has spent, close to 50 years in various positions, and she's dealt with number of leaders, and even without doing an NLP course or an empathy course or something, she can speak probably for hours on her experience and her stories.
Love,
So come on,
love.
Brenda, tell us something. One, why you raised your hand, and a few experiences of yours in your corporate journey.
Actually, I want to ask a question. I don't want to ask, I don't want to raise, share experience today.
Okay.
There's been always been since Daniel Goleman wrote his first book on emotional intelligence, which was, I think, in which year, if you can tell me? The first book. We were
Not
just
sure.
here so many
I'm very
after
bad
that.
with names and dates. So I
Yeah.
will not take
So
a guess
basically,
there.
people concluded from that he was saying that EI is more important than IQ. I receive his letters regularly. So in the
Mhm.
last year or two, he has written other books, but he has been trying to dispel this myth and saying very clearly in every single newsletter that I never said that EQ is more important than IQ. I've just said that IQ, we have not given sufficient importance to EQ as we have given to IQ. So this debate has been going on, particularly in the corporate space, as to whether, because there are people who are maybe born with a lower IQ. What happens to their EQ? And also even the belief itself that when you're recruiting people, you're looking in. Initially we used to have those intelligence tests and all. You won't know, but I'm 73 years old, so I will know. I've done a lot of them. So people would go by the IQ. Then when in the 70 something, when Daniel Goleman came in, actually he was not the first one who spoke about emotional intelligence. He's the one who made it more popular because of
Correct.
his book. It
Correct.
was taken much
Correct.
before him, right? So he's not
Yes.
the
Yes.
father of emotional intelligence.
Correct.
But when he
Correct.
wrote his book, and even I read it, we did get the impression that emotional intelligence is in a way more important. So this, in the last 2 3 years, his letters and his new books have been clearly saying that was a myth. I did not say it. I'm saying that IQ is also very important for your success in the corporate space. All I'm saying is that we have not given sufficient importance to EQ. Now,
Correct.
as we are at the cusp of AI, I think he could even change that a bit, because as AI comes in and more dehumanizing will take place in the short run, the trend, the all research shows us that AI, what the disruption that we are expecting AI to bring about, meaning layoffs, and that in the short run is actually we are actually over exaggerating it, whereas
Correct.
long run, the the effect that AI will have in the long run, we are underestimating it. And at that level, which may be 4 to 5 years later, that is when I think the critical thinking, emotional intelligence, problem solving, creativity, and innovation will come to the fore. Maybe not in the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, but when AI has settled down a bit and it has been dehumanized, and it has been, psychology has been used to collaborate with AI, that's when these four things, including EQ, will become far more important. I think he's going to change his mind also in the next 4 or 5 years.
Thank you for sharing that. Very powerful thoughts. But I have to add something here. We all know of cases where a person getting into an IIT would commit suicide. Why? IQ था तो IIT में चले गए. EQ कम था तो suicide हुआ. So that's why, that's one simple statement which highlights volumes about why EQ. You don't need to do a course. As I said, very well said by Deepak sir as well, that we don't need to do courses. We are all wired with the idea of empathy or EI. But the only thing is, we are so busy running after the hard skills, the technical skills, the so-called data points, that we are missing on the interpersonalness of it, the social fabric is suffering today with loneliness and, as you said, dehumanizing things. Why that is happening? Because empathy has suffering. It's an all-time low. Why that is suffering? Because that's supposed to be a soft skill, and soft skills are not that important according to our culture. And most of the, people feel soft skills are not that important. But we realize that when you are first meeting somebody, you don't know whether that person is a topper or whatever, big things they are doing. You just feel the vibe of that person. And if that vibe doesn't connect, and now there have been a lot of experiments done by doctors like, Joe Dispenza and more, where we know that this is not sheer soft skill. This is physics, clear electromagnetic radiations making your vibe. So there's so much to it now that we have to understand that this has been sidelined to quite an extent, and we need to now bring this into picture if we want to fight the epidemic of loneliness, of dehumanizing, not respecting the other person, being judgmental about why he or she would feel like this in an X environment. We are all unique. We are all wired in a certain way. We all have our own filters of life. Based on that filter, I would react and you would react. Who's right? Who's wrong? What decides that? Maybe both of us are right. As long as we feel supported, we feel acknowledged and validated, trust me, this will continue to rule. AI, no AI, whatever.
Absolutely, I agree with you. Do you agree
Thank
that
you.
actually it is not just that we have to move from one level of cognitive to emotional to compassionate level? Do you think we each of us humans are born with a gene of compassion, and what we really need to do is to build it as a muscle? We all have the muscles, but if I have not used those muscles or exercised them, they will not be there. I'm just speaking from
No, I
on
so agree. I so agree with the muscle bit of it. It is definitely a mental muscle, a social muscle that we utilize to exercise.
absolutely.
Now, what we have to understand it, the definition bit of three types of empathy was not to compartmentalize it, was only to kind of understand that there are nuances to it. Some of us would be great. So just the way Deepak sir said, Brenda has been doing amazing work, knowing you, maybe he's seen that empathy bit and maybe that deepened bit. So he's able to moderate his, understanding of you in a certain words. Maybe that's level 3 that he saw. But some other people may not have seen you on level 3. They've seen you on level 1. So there's no compartmentalization of empathy, but for the sake of understanding is where we look at this in this manner.
Thank you very much. You have explained this so very clearly, crisply. I think one doesn't have to read even Daniel Goleman's second book or his latest book
Thank
or
you.
his
Thank
letters.
you.
You've done it so well. And where I'm coming from is because I might recommend this to you. I am an alumni of Stanford School of Compassion.
Okay, beautiful.
So
Beautiful.
it is. You might have heard of it. It is. It has been
I have.
founded by a surgeon called Dr. Duty, and they have very good programs. But I am. They've invited me now. I've been part of that for many years, so I've been also affected by it. And I would recommend that you at least attend some of, because you're so much into it and you can speak so clearly about it, which, most of us can't. And some of the sessions are really mind blowing, but of course, it means that you've got to get up in the morning at 2 o'clock in the morning.
I
These
don't
days, they have
mind
it a
that. My
little
work
later.
anyhow makes me get up at different timelines anyhow. So
Yeah.
don't
So
worry. I will.
but these days, it's about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. And they actually it goes on the basis that we don't just have to grow into it, but we have a gene of compassion. We have to build on it.
Yes.
And you have said it so beautifully. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. I came in a little late, but I loved your session. I've
I
taken
love
down
you,
2
Preston.
pages of
Thank you.
notes. I've taken
Thank
down
you.
2 pages of notes.
Thank you.
Thank you
Pragati,
very
on a
much.
side note, Brenda is our patron saint. She's been with us in all the 208 episodes we've been online and offline. She's always contributing. She's always helping. She's always suggesting. She's always sharing her experiences, and that connection which you spoke about between me and her. I don't know where you picked that up, but during her difficult time, just 2 years ago, she was going through cancer and all. And I remember I was one of the very few people she had confided in, telling me, this is what I'm going through and this is what is going to happen. And, all the God bless yous which you get from your clients and your people, she gets multiple God bless yous from all those who are around her. And that is why, we saw her with black hair, and then we saw her with no hair. Then we saw her with pure white hair, and now she has that salt and pepper gray hair, So we've seen 4 versions of Brenda in the last 4 years.
Oh, it's an honor to have you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
No. It's been a great. I just joined, but I'm telling you, having read so much, having attended so much, being an area of quite a bit of focus on my own research, I learned a lot about putting it across simply, crisply, and in a way anybody can understand. Thank you, ma'am.
Brenda, you
Thank you
spoke about AI and what it is going to do, and it is going to change, and it is not going to change. Just let me share something with you which happened just now. I logged in to Copilot, and I gave it a prompt saying, I'm going to be interviewing a emotional intelligence expert, a psychologist, and an empathy person. Suggest me a few questions which I should ask her. And it suggested me a few questions, and the last line says, I know you are a financial advisor and you speak on leadership. Do you want me to ask or say something on that too? So AI is learning, is understanding what is going on, that the large language models are continuously adapting themselves to what we are doing, what they understand what we are doing. So in the near future, a lot is going to change. I think we are underestimating what AI is going to do, but that is a different topic and a discussion together. However, a related question to Pragati is this. In this digital world where human interactions are reducing, 20 of us are there in this box looking at each other and talking to each other. Digital, how do you empathize with somebody who you do not feel, touch, or get that vibe with when you are in the digital space?
Wonderful question, I must say. And that's where I remember just some time back you said those big words, those, and that's the power of your language.
Yeah.
Because your EI shows into number one, your understanding of people and perceptions, number two, your language, number three, your patterns, and then your non-verbal cues. So when we look at somebody and I do a lot of online sessions, and currently the number of sessions I'm doing, आप ये लगा लो मेरे चश्मे का number 1.5 से 1.75 हो चुका है. So which clearly means I am very intently looking at the person on the other end. I have to be having that person on camera.
Yeah.
And there's something called sensory acuity. जैसे हम किसी को जब अपना 100% presence देते हैं, focus देते हैं, what do? We look at the non-verbal cues. We just don't hear what they are saying. We hear what they are really saying, and really being the capital word here, which means we read between the lines, which means we see, and then we hear, and then we match.
Yeah.
And that requires a lot of presence. If you're just into a session to hear something and looking at the background, यहाँ भी सुन रहे हैं, वहाँ भी, तो आप वो match नहीं कर पाओगे. And that is where online, not everybody is good. And I know you might say, where's that coming from? That comes from the confidence that if you have to deliver online currently, so from 3 leadership brick and mortar structures to, complete 99.9% work online, I have come to a point, jahan looking at the person, I can tell you whether what they are telling me is the correct story or not. Now, that's not something that I must say, oh, I'm amazing. No, I'm not. I am just trying that to bridge that gap between what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing, and I'm trying to minimize that gap. With online, all those who could minimize that gap and then utilize language, and maybe certain questions, what you are seeing, you may ask question and ask the right question. Art of questioning, as I said, is not about asking anything. It's about asking, so for example, we call this, again, I have to use a big word, sorry, but I use it. So we call it primary evidence. अभी आप smile कर रहे हैं, आपका body भी हिल रहा है. So it's clearly like you're enjoying this one thing that I just said, right? That's primary evidence. कोई assumption नहीं है. आपको देख के मुझे ये primary evidence मिल रहा है, and then that comes my next step of blending what this person is feeling, right? As a matter of fact, this is a skill we all have. But as a psychologist, as somebody working online, I have to hone the skill day in, day out to even bigger levels. So I think this answers that online presence is not about just being behind the camera. It's about being on the camera, looking at the other person, utilizing your sensory acuity and articulating it in your language to kind of check for any gaps.
Yeah, wonderful. I mean, you picked up a real life example. You saw me, smiling, laughing, and body movement, and correlated with what you were trying to say. Let me take you on that. I am that sort of a person where, I am expressive. I can speak clearly. My body language also speaks for itself. And then there are people who are exactly opposite of who I am. How do you read those people then?
So that's where again language comes to our rescue. So
Yeah.
when we see somebody being very uptight, we ask questions so that we get into the real. So instead of thinking that I know it, so that's where, as I said, empathy is all about not being judgmental, not
Yeah.
about operating, being in my shoes, but trying to understand your situation is not empathy.
Yeah.
I have to come into your shoes. To come into your shoes, I have to talk a bit, ask a bit, dig a bit. And maybe when you don't want me to do, maybe step back a bit. I think that altogether requires a lot of sense of discretion.
Yeah.
वो डेवलप करना आना पड़ता है, उसी के लिए कुछ साल लग जाते हैं. So I say 3 E's: education, experience, exposure. All of them together get you to that sense कितना हम जा सकते हैं, कितना हमें back जाना है. So I think that's where the whole idea is.
Again, being in somebody else's shoes, that is the first objection you get from people. Tum kya jano what I am going through? You are not
Exactly.
in my shoes. You will never understand what I'm saying.
Yes. Which means either we've never done that, we've never given them that focus and intentional presence, or
Yeah.
whenever we've done them, we've been that super ज्ञानी.
Yeah.
तुम ऐसा क्यों नहीं करते? अरे इसमें तो ये हो सकता है. And we all know. But I think to be with such people is about, I don't know. I want to hear it from you. What do you know about it? What do you want to tell me about it?
Yeah. So Jayesh Patel has raised his hand. I'll give you a chance to ask the question, but first let me read out a question from MK Sansgiri. He had put it a little while back. He asks, how do you address empathy in perspective of leadership, where young professional nowadays, especially Gen Z, they are focusing only on their promotion and nothing else. They are basically skipping jobs. 6 months here, 6 months there, a promotion, got promoted. At the end of 4 years, they've probably worked in 12 companies, started from 20,000, have reached a point where they are 5 lakhs, probably making in a month, but still unsatisfied and looking for that next leap. How do you help or, speak to or talk to such people?
Okay, so where is this coming from? That's the first understanding. This is coming from the peer group, which says same company में रहोगे तो ये कभी तुम्हारा पड़ेगा नहीं, right? And
Yeah.
that's the cultural thing, all of these, young people, they have very clear agendas. We have to skip jobs to first raise the bar of the salaries that they are getting.
Yeah.
And secondly, the culture says, how can you be stuck with the same boss for so long? So peer group, peer pressure, and maybe sometimes it's the boss also to be, considered.
Yes.
I have also been on the other side where I have seen bosses not being right to this generation.
Yeah.
They are rude to them. They don't understand where are they coming from. It's almost like a job of a parent.
Yeah.
आपका बच्चा नालायक है तो उसको आप घर से थोड़ी निकाल देते हैं, आप उसको
Yeah.
डिसोन थोड़ी कर देते हैं. You try to make them see, right? So I guess while on one end they have the peer pressure to do certain things in a culturally specific way, on other hand it's a role of a good boss. So I make them see again. वो कहते हैं ना घोड़े वाले blinkers हटा के थोड़ा सा broad दिखाना पड़ता है कि my dear, what you are doing, where is this coming from? And now this is coming, how can you do it in your, unique way?
Yes.
How can you follow it up in a way so that you are not disowned and disfranchised from your peer group, but you also belong to the other part where you see it as a big picture? And you know what? That takes a lot of confidence to go against the stride. If every other friend that you meet every Friday, every Saturday, they meet their friends, and then they have certain ज्ञान to बाटोफाई, आप वो ज्ञान नहीं ले रहे हो, आप अपना अलग चल रहे हो, आपके डिसोन होने के चांसेस बढ़ जाते हैं. ये तो सुनता ही नहीं है, and God forbid something goes against, them, then the friend, I told you so. That's what the world is all about. I think it's very important for this generation to have right coaches and mentors. It's very important for them to, maybe आपको ऐसा लगता है कि वो नहीं सुन रहे हैं, but it is still our job to keep telling them that, listen, you've got to be thinking this big. You've got to be looking into meaning. Meaning है ही नहीं ना, बाहर हर Friday जब आप जाके मस्ती करके आ रहे हैं, मंडे आप थके हुए ऑफिस वापस आ रहे हैं, मीनिंग का मतलब ही नहीं है। हम सुबह उठ के ऑफिस चले जाए वही बहुत बड़ी बात है। हैविंग अ चाइल्ड ऑफ दिस एज ग्रुप, so my daughter is in this age group, so I know how this works with them. Luckily for me, I have that influence to tell her, listen girl, you're going in a wrong direction, you've got to do this.
Yeah.
And because I'm a parent coming from an empathetic point, she at least sits up and listens. So
Hmm.
that's where empathy becomes important, क्योंकि अब आप उनके मेंटल मॉडल में झांक के देख रहे हो कि ये जो कर रहे हैं ये आ कहाँ से रहा है,
Yeah.
और अगर ये आ रहा है, what else do they need? Maybe they need to have little more understanding, little more realization, little more perceptual position shift.
Yeah.
So this is how I make them see the world, the realities, and I call them out in case they are not seeing it right. ज्यादा से ज्यादा क्या करेंगे, मुझे छोड़ जाएंगे, बट अगर वो रियलिटी को पाई कर लेते हैं, so they would always say, ma'am, God bless you, I'm in a very different position now. So
Yeah.
they've been different, I work with doctors and so many people, and when they see the reality and they shift and they move to a bigger, better position, they never fail to come back to me and say, God bless you, you made me see this, I would not have seen it otherwise.
Yeah.
So luckily I have nothing to lose. एक client lose करने का कुछ नहीं है, but हाँ gains बहुत strong है, so I call it out.
Yeah. Yeah. Jayesh, ask your question. Unmute yourself. Go ahead.
So, good morning, Praggati ji. So my question actually comes from the same thing. So some years back, almost 8 years of my journey have been with customers. So in one way or the other form. One form was to create services for them, and the other was to actually listen to them and do it. So, but I actually failed to little bit establish that whether empathy could be one of the factors towards customer loyalty, because that's what is something which is ailing in the business today. Especially, I come from the auto sector. So the point is, there has always been a conflict that okay, the product has always been at the top and the customer loyalty comes secondary. So just wanted to know your perspective, since you have been done very deep dwelling into empathy and this thing. So it's like whether empathy has a close relation to customer loyalty, or it's like one of the factors, or what would be your opinion?
Empathy, the role of empathy in enhancing customer loyalty.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
So empathy, as I said, thank you, Jayesh, for that question. Beautiful question, I must say. Empathy, as I said, is an interpersonal social skill. Sales is a social interpersonal domain, which means if you are slightly aware, if you attune yourself and become more aware to the moods of your client and adjust and accommodate your presentations accordingly, the choice of words accordingly, you would be able to pitch them far better than anything else. Now, what you're trying to do, so listen to this. So language has been one of my very strong points, whether I write or I speak. I love language because language has this capacity to bypass your conscious mind and to go deeper into a subconscious connection. अब इसका क्या मतलब हुआ? इसका मतलब है जितने रेसिस्टेंस आपको क्लाइंट से आते हैं वो कॉन्शियस माइंड से आते हैं।
Yeah.
लेकिन जब आप सबकॉन्शियस लेवल पे किसी को अंडरस्टैंड करके, मूड्स को रीड करके, नॉन वर्बल क्यूज को रीड करके आप अपने प्रेजेंटेशंस या प्रोडक्ट्स को पिच करते हैं, एक डिफरेंट लेवल पे वो कनेक्ट करता है। एज आई सेड, मिरर न्यूरॉन्स, दे लुक एट यू एंड दे फील, ओह यार, दिस पर्सन मेक सेंस। अच्छा, तो दो क्वेश्चंस और पूछेंगे। द मोर क्वेश्चंस दे आस्क, द मोर यू आर मेकिंग सेंस टू दैम। Generally, people see इतने questions पूछ रहे हैं, पक्का they will not be, buying my product or not buying my idea.
Yeah.
In fact, question is a very powerful sign that you have bypassed the conscious resistance and moved to a point where they now want to be clear. So I think empathy is all about connection. Empathy is all about वो जो बोल रहे हैं उसको आप सुन रहे हो, उसके verbal cues को आप नोटिस करके अपना जो verbally बोल रहे हो या non verbally बोल रहे हो, it blends. The other person can feel you, not just understand what you are saying. Feel. That feel becomes important. And then you kind of come across as, okay, so now that you've understood this and now you feel about this, this is my offer, or this is my product or service to address your pain point. Never be in a hurry to close the deal. Never be in a hurry to kind of not listen. I think अगर हमें listening आ गया ना, हमारा आधा job is done, Jayesh. Just listen to them. And बहुत छोटा सा एक है, because I have worked very actively. I love marketing. Contrary to popular belief, I love marketing. Mera conversion ratio, somebody who comes to me and is almost more than 80%, which is huge, I must say. Why that is so? Because I hear from a point of understanding and connection. I don't hear from a point of मुझे ये बेचना है या ये service देना है. Even if you go to my LinkedIn profile, you will find I'm so big on contribution, on connection, on giving. Develop these qualities within you. I know this may sound like very utopic, but कोई और रास्ता है नहीं. बाकी रास्ते शॉर्टकट्स हैं, कभी काम करेंगे कभी नहीं करेंगे. This would make you an amazing person. आपके पहुंचने से पहले आपकी goodwill पहुंच जाएगी.
Yeah.
I think this is where we have to work on.
Yeah, on a side note, Jayesh, and a little bit adding to what Pragati said, if you want to sell a car to a person who knows, when you know
I'm
that he will.
convinced with empathy.
Yeah,
I'm already convinced with empathy.
Yes, no,
Because
all I'm saying
Rob-
is, if you know that there is a customer, the chances of him writing out a check is high when he has a glass of beer or whiskey in his hand.
Mhm.
Next time you will go and meet him only at that time only and only at that place only. If you want to sell to him, otherwise no.
But
Yeah, I
Jayesh,
just
does
wanted
this
to get a
answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah, it answers the question. You have put it in a way that it talks about something which you nailed the bullseye, which is it's like the value. It enhances the value in the transaction, and at the same time, it adds something to the business value. So, because normally I think the question came from the business side only, that whether we should cultivate these skills into the, because the industry which we are there right now, it's not driven by AI. It's totally driven by humans, the
Yes.
manpower. And
Exactly. Exactly.
So I
Exactly.
guess I got the business perspective,
Yes.
which I was just like,
Yeah, the AI code is finally written by humans only. So it really, at some point, it is that human emotion. When you are typing out a prompt to an AI, you ask him or it something, and then add the word please. See, you will get two different responses from that same AI to the same question.
And
That
if
is
I
the
add
human.
here, Deepak ji, there is something to add here. So
Yeah.
AI maybe humanize the response has
Yes.
become a tab there.
Yes.
Imagine. So
Yeah.
humanize करने की जरूरत क्या अगर आप इतने amazing है तो?
Yes, imagine, humanize the response. Yeah, wonderful. So for the past 1 hour, 6 minutes, we have been online. We have been listening to these long tongue twisters, which, Pragati has been throwing at us and then trying to explain to us in Hindi also. And a few people said, yes, we have understood everything. Abhijit is so very happy. Brenda is very happy. I am also so very happy to have, hosted and co-hosted this 208th Bloom Sunday Talk Show with Pragati as our guest today. Well, this show goes on 208. We actually complete 4 years today. 4 years just this day in the pandemic we started, and here we have reached, and we got a chance to listen to Pragati after 4 years after we started. I don't know what will happen after 5, 8, or maybe even 10 years. I'm sure if I'm alive, I'll still be hosting the Sunday Bloom Talk Show, whether it be online or offline. And I hope all of you will join us next Sunday for the 209th Sunday Bloom Talk Show with another special guest. Let me take this opportunity to thank Pragati for taking time out, speaking with us, making us understand, and a lot of takeaways from a lot of people. But what I can say is, even though she is a Rao, her Hindi is wow. Thank you, Pragati. Thank you, everybody, for joining in. Thank you, everybody,
Thank
guys.
you so much. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining. Take care. Bye.
God bless us all. Yes.